She just wanted to save her father. He just wanted to close the deal of a lifetime. But all it took was one contract, one trip, and one unscripted glance for everything to spiral out of control. Because when the heart enters the picture, not even love knows how to play by the rules. Forgive the interruption, but if you enjoy this kind of story, don't forget to subscribe. Help us grow this channel, and may your kindness be returned to you twofold. Thank you, and enjoy the story. New York City glittered under the afternoon sun as Damian Sterling gazed at the urban landscape from his corner office on the top floor of One Vanderbilt. At 32, the heir to the Sterling Media Group empire was as known for his brilliant business strategies as he was for his scandalous appearances in the society pages. Times Square, Central Park, and the skyscrapers of the Upper East Side spread before him like a map of the power he had consolidated over the years. Today, however, not even that privileged view could quell his unease. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Martinez is here with the documents you requested," his secretary announced over the intercom. Damian straightened his Italian silk tie and turned to greet Julian Martinez, his executive assistant for the past 5 years, and perhaps the only person he truly trusted in the cutthroat world of corporate America. "Tell me it's good news, Julian," Damian said, extending a hand for the black leather folder his assistant offered. Julian, ever impeccable in his Oxford grey suit, maintained a neutral expression. "It's complicated, boss. AsiaCorp has confirmed their interest in the merger. The estimated value exceeds $12 billion. Damian couldn't suppress a smile of satisfaction. The merger with the Asian tech giant was the culmination of years of work. AsiaCorp wouldn't just multiply his company's value, it would open doors to markets on 5 continents. But, Julian continued, and that single word was enough to make Damian's smile vanish, there's a rather peculiar condition. "What condition?" Damian asked, impatiently flipping through the documents. "Mr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the principal shareholder and chairman of AsiaCorp, insists on negotiating only with married businessmen." Damian looked up, convinced he'd misheard. "What did you say?" "Mr. Tanaka is extremely traditional. His exact words were, 'Family stability reflects business stability.' He has systematically refused to partner with bachelors or recent divorcees. He says he can't trust someone who hasn't demonstrated commitment in their personal life." Damian let out a laugh of disbelief that echoed through the office. "Is this a joke? Is it 2025 or 1925? "I'm afraid he's completely serious," Julian replied, showing him an email on his tablet. His legal team included it as a preliminary clause in the Memorandum of Understanding. Damian sank into his Italian leather armchair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. His reputation as New York's most eligible bachelor was practically a registered trademark. His parties at his Hamptons mansion were legendary. His flings with international models filled gossip columns, and his lifestyle, yachts in Miami, weekends in Aspen, and partying until dawn, was the envy of an entire generation of young entrepreneurs. "And what the hell am I supposed to do? Get married in 2 weeks?" he asked sarcastically. Julian's silence was more eloquent than any answer. "No, no, no, no. It's absurd," Damian protested, rising to pour himself a whiskey from the expensive decanter set by the window. "There has to be another way." "The international tour begins in exactly 15 days, Julian informed him. "A 5-country tour, starting in Tokyo, then Sydney, Dubai, Paris, and ending back in New York. 2 weeks of travel where you'll have to present yourself as a happily married man." The crystal glass trembled slightly in Damian's hand as he stared at the amber liquid. "What if we just tell him the truth, that I'm single but committed to the business?" Mr. Cato, his intermediary, was very clear. Mr. Tanaka has already backed out of 2 similar mergers when he discovered the CEOs were single. It's a matter of principle for him. Damian downed the whiskey in one gulp, feeling the burn in his throat. "What about a serious relationship? I could say I'm engaged." "It won't work. His team has already done their research. They know your reputation, boss. They want to see a marriage certificate and a wife present for the entire international tour." "Damn it!" Damian slammed his fist on the desk. "Are you telling me I have to choose between the deal of my life and my freedom?" Julian adjusted his glasses, and for the first time in the conversation allowed himself a small smile. "Not necessarily, sir. Perhaps we need a creative solution." "What do you have in mind?" Damian asked, suddenly interested. "A temporary marriage? A business arrangement, so to speak. Someone to pose as your wife for those 2 weeks and then disappear." Damian considered the idea. It wouldn't be the first time he'd paid for companionship, though never for something this elaborate. She'd have to be convincing, not a model or actress they might recognize. Someone intelligent, presentable, but unknown in our circles, Julian agreed. Someone who can maintain absolute discretion. And I'd have to be very convincing, Damien muttered more to himself than to his assistant. Tanaka is no fool. If he suspects it's a sham, the whole thing goes to hell. New York City churned on below them, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the lavish office. Damien looked out the window again, watching the lights begin to flicker on as dusk fell, painting the skyline in gold and purple. "Get me a list of candidates," he finally ordered. "Discreet, smart, presentable. Women who need the money but have class. And prepare an ironclad contract, absolute confidentiality." "How much are you willing to offer?" Julian asked, already taking notes on his tablet. Damien thought of the billions at stake, of the global expansion the Asia-Corp merger represented, of everything he had built since his father's death left him in charge of the empire at 25. "Whatever it takes," he answered with determination. "This will be the most important role of my life, and I'm not going to lose this opportunity over some archaic whim." As the sun finally set behind the steel and glass canyons of Manhattan, Damien Sterling began to plot the biggest deception of his life. A deception that, unbeknownst to him, would change his destiny in ways even his privileged imagination could not conceive. 3 days after the Asia-Corp ultimatum, Damien was pacing through the central atrium of the Sterling building, reviewing the profiles Julian had prepared. 12 suitable candidates to play the role of a temporary wife, each with their background, photos, and estimated price. "None of them convince me," Damien muttered, swiping through his tablet. "This one looks like a professional gold digger. This one has too much social media exposure. And this one, seriously, a soap opera actress. Tanaka would recognize her instantly." The tycoon rubbed his temples, feeling a migraine coming on. The time pressure sharpened his frustration. 12 days. Only 12 days left to find someone, prepare her, and turn her into a convincing wife. That's when he saw her. At the far end of the atrium, a young woman moved with quiet grace among the enormous planters of fiddle-leaf figs and Kentia palms that decorated the space. She wore a simple olive-green uniform with the logo Viridian Gardens embroidered on the chest. Her dark hair, pulled back in a loose braid, contrasted with the meticulous precision of her movements as she pruned the dead leaves from a magnolia tree. Damien stopped, watching her with growing curiosity. There was something hypnotic in the way her hands worked, in the absolute concentration with which she examined each plant. Unlike the rest of the maintenance staff who always seemed to hurry when they saw him, she hadn't even noticed his presence. "Who is she?" he asked one of the security guards. "She's from the landscaping company, Mr. Sterling. Comes twice a week to take care of the atrium plants." Damien walked over, drawn by a sudden idea. As he closed the distance, he could better see her features. Large, amber-colored eyes, light olive skin, and an expression of complete serenity as she worked. No makeup, no pretense, completely removed from the corporate world that surrounded her. "Good morning," Damien said as he reached her. The young woman looked up, startled by the interruption. For a moment, her eyes reflected simple curiosity, until recognition dawned on her face. "Good morning, sir," she replied politely, straightening up and wiping her hands on her uniform. "What's your name?" he asked, using the tone he reserved for major negotiations. "Eliza Flores," she answered. "I'm a botanist with Viridian Gardens. I'm sorry if I'm in the way. I'm almost done with this section." Damien studied her more closely. She wasn't the kind of bombshell he usually had on his arm at social events, not tall or statuesque, but she possessed a natural beauty and an innate elegance in her every move. More importantly, she was a complete unknown in his social circle. "How old are you, Eliza?" She frowned slightly at the personal question. 26, sir. "Is there a problem with the plants? If you have a complaint about our service—" "No, there's no problem," Damien interrupted, and then without preamble he added, "I need a wife." Eliza blinked several times, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me? A wife? Temporary? For 2 weeks?" The young gardener looked around, as if searching for hidden cameras or some rational explanation for what she was hearing. "Mr. Sterling, I think you have me confused with someone else. I take care of plants, not whatever it is you're implying." "I'm offering you $500,000, Damien stated, carefully watching her reaction. "You just have to pretend to be my wife, during an international business trip. 10 days, 5 countries. In return, I'll give you enough money so you'll never have to worry about anything for the rest of your life. Eliza's eyes widened for a moment at the figure, but her expression quickly shifted to one of indignation. Are you kidding me? She asked, her voice tense. Or do you really think you can just buy people like their things? I'm not buying anyone, Damien replied, taken aback by her reaction. I'm proposing a business agreement. You pretend to be my wife, I pay you. Simple. Simple. Eliza let out a disbelieving laugh. You think it's simple to treat people like commodities? Do you think because you wear $10,000 suits and have your name on this building you can buy anyone's dignity? Damien was speechless. In his 32 years, no one had ever spoken to him like that. His employees trembled in his presence. His lovers vied for his attention, and even his business rivals showed him deference. This gardener, however, was looking at him as if he were the most despicable person on earth. I don't think you understand, he tried to explain. It's an acting job, like... I understand perfectly, she cut him off. You want someone to pretend to love you because I assume no one would put up with you for real. I'm not surprised, being so arrogant and superficial. Damien felt his blood boil. $1 million, he said, raising his voice. I'm offering you $1 million. Eliza gathered her gardening tools with precise, dignified movements. She slung her small backpack over her shoulder and looked the tycoon directly in the eye. Do you know the difference between these plants and you, Mr. Sterling? Plants, no matter how valuable, never forget their roots. You, on the other hand, seem to have forgotten what it means to be human. The young woman walked away with a steady stride, leaving Damien standing in the middle of the atrium, surrounded by the lush plants she tended with such care. Julian, who had watched the scene from a distance, approached cautiously. I take it that wasn't one of the candidates I proposed. No, Damien replied, his gaze still fixed on the door where Eliza had disappeared. But she's exactly what we need. The woman who just turned you down and insulted you, Julian asked, confused. Damien turned to his assistant, and for the first time in days, he smiled. Precisely. The only person in this city who isn't willing to be bought. That makes her perfect. I don't follow your logic, boss. If we want to convince Tanaka I have a genuine relationship, I need someone genuine. Someone who doesn't treat me like a god. Someone real. Julian adjusted his glasses, skeptical. And how do you plan to convince her, if I may ask? Clearly the money didn't work. Damien looked at the atrium plants, thoughtful. For the first time in a long time, he felt the challenge of something he couldn't just buy. I don't know yet. But I need her, Julian. Find out everything about Eliza Flores, everything. Because I'm going to find a way to make her agree no matter what it takes. Night had fallen over Queens, where Eliza shared a modest apartment with her younger sister. After a long day, all she wanted was a shower and to forget the bizarre encounter with Damien Sterling. Life, however, had other plans. As she was making a simple dinner, her phone rang with a number she recognized immediately. NYC Health Pluses Hospitals. Hello? She answered, a chill running down her spine. Ms. Flores? This is Elmhurst Hospital calling. Your father, Gilbert Flores, was just admitted to the emergency room. He suffered an acute myocardial infarction. The following words became a distant buzz as Eliza's world fell apart. She turned off the stove with trembling hands and grabbed her keys. I'm on my way, she managed to say before hanging up. In less than 30 minutes, Eliza was pushing through the emergency room doors. In the waiting area, she found her 16-year-old sister, Lily, with red-rimmed eyes and shaking hands. What happened, Lily? How's Dad? He was at the shop working on a car when he collapsed, the teenager sobbed. His apprentice brought him here. The doctors say he needs surgery fast. Something about blocked arteries. An exhausted-looking doctor approached them. Family of Gilbert Flores? We're his daughters, Eliza answered, pulling herself together. How is my father? Your father needs a triple coronary bypass surgery. His main arteries are almost completely blocked. Without the intervention, I'm sorry, but his chances are very low. When can you operate? Eliza asked. The doctor paused uncomfortably. That's the other issue. As he doesn't have private health insurance, we're managing his case through the public system. But there's a waiting list for this type of surgery. How long? Eliza interrupted. At least 2 months. He doesn't have 2 months, she replied, panic rising in her chest. You just said that without the surgery. There is the option of having it done privately, the doctor suggested. But the cost? How much? Eliza asked, her voice firm. Approximately $150,000, considering the surgery, hospitalization, and recovery. Eliza felt the floor give way beneath her. $150,000, more than she could earn in years. An impossibility. I need to see him, she requested, holding back tears. The doctor nodded and led them down a corridor to a room where Gilbert Flores lay connected to several monitors. At 58, he had always been a tough, strong man, a respected mechanic in his neighborhood who had raised his 2 daughters alone since their mother died of cancer 10 years ago. Seeing him now, vulnerable and pale, caused the tears Eliza had been holding back to finally stream down her face. "You're going to be okay, Dad," she whispered, taking his hand. "I promise." That night, in the small apartment that smelled of dampness and the geraniums Eliza grew on the fire escape, the sisters faced their reality. "We can sell the garage," Lily suggested. "The garage would barely cover a fraction of it," Eliza replied, doing the math in her head. "And it's Dad's livelihood. If we sell it, what will we live on afterward?" "I'll get a loan," the younger girl insisted. "From who?" "No bank will lend us that kind of money without collateral." A heavy silence fell in the small living room, broken only by the ticking of their grandfather's old clock. It was then that Eliza remembered the tycoon's offer. $1 million. A fortune that would solve not only her father's surgery, but their entire family's future. She didn't sleep that night. The thought of accepting Damian Sterling's proposal made her stomach turn. Everything she'd said to him was true. He was arrogant, superficial, used to buying whatever he wanted. But it was also true that her father would die without that operation. By dawn, Eliza had made her decision. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Eliza Flores presented herself at the reception desk of the Sterling building. "I need to see Mr. Sterling," she declared firmly. "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked, looking her up and down. "No, but he'll want to see me," Eliza replied. "Tell him Eliza Flores, the gardener, is here." 20 minutes later, she was escorted to Damian's office on the top floor. The tycoon received her with a satisfied smile, as if he had been expecting her. "Miss Flores, what a pleasant surprise." Eliza didn't beat around the bush. "I accept your proposal," she stated, keeping her chin high despite the lump in her throat. Damian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's changed since yesterday?" "My personal circumstances are none of your business," she answered coldly. "But I have 2 absolute conditions." "I'm listening," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "First, our arrangement will be strictly professional. No intimate touching, no kissing, no physical contact beyond what is absolutely necessary to keep up appearances." Damian nodded, amused by her serious tone. "Reasonable. And the second?" "You can't fall in love with me," Eliza declared, looking him directly in the eye. The tycoon let out a laugh so genuine that for a moment he seemed like a different person. "Are you serious? That condition is completely unnecessary, I assure you." "I just want to make it clear," she insisted. "This is a business deal, nothing more." "Trust me, you don't have to worry," Damian replied, sizing her up. "No offense, but you're not exactly my type. I like women who are sophisticated, with class, who know how to navigate my world." Eliza gritted her teeth, resisting the urge to snap back at his arrogance. "Do we have a deal then?" "Almost," Damian said, getting up to walk around his desk. "First, I need to know why you changed your mind. Yesterday, you were willing to turn down $1 million on principle. Today, those principles seem to have vanished. What happened?" Eliza hesitated, but finally answered, "My father is in the hospital. He needs an urgent surgery I can't afford." A flash of understanding crossed Damian's face. "I see, so it's just the money." "Is that not enough for you? It's my father's life." Damian studied her for a few moments, and then extended his hand. "We have a deal, Ms. Flores. $1 million for 10 days of your life. Half now, half when the trip is over." Eliza shook his hand, feeling as if she had just made a pact with the devil. "I need the first payment today. The surgery can't wait." "Of course," Damian replied, picking up his phone. "Julian, prepare a wire transfer of $500,000 to the account Ms. Flores provides, and contact Mount Sinai. Tell them a patient will be transferred from Elmhurst today. Gilbert Flores. All expenses are on my account." Seeing Eliza's surprised look, he added, "I assume you want the best medical team for your father, right? Consider it an advance on our agreement." For the first time since she'd met him, Eliza saw something more than arrogance in Damian Sterling. It was just a glimmer of humanity. but it was enough to let her breathe a little easier as she embarked on the biggest sham of her life. "Absolutely not," Eliza declared, crossing her arms in front of the full-length mirror in the presidential suite of the St. Regis Hotel. The stylist, a thin woman named Renata with a French accent and designer glasses, held up a low-cut red dress as if it were the solution to all the world's problems. "But Cherie, this Valentino screams tycoon's wife. It is perfect for the reception at the Japanese embassy." "It screams not me," Eliza retorted, "and I'm not your Cherie." Damien, watching the scene from the sofa while reviewing documents on his laptop, sighed in exasperation. It was the third such confrontation in the last 2 hours. "Renata, could you give us a moment?" he asked, closing his laptop. When the stylist had left, Damien approached Eliza. "I thought we had an agreement. The agreement is that I pretend to be your wife, not that I become someone else," she replied, gesturing to the dozen extravagant dresses laid out on the king-size bed. "I'm not wearing clothes that make me feel like a mannequin. You need to look like a model, like your usual girlfriends," she interrupted. "That would only raise suspicion. If you really want this to work, I have to remain myself, just a more refined version." Damien studied her carefully. In the 3 days since they'd closed their deal, he'd discovered that Eliza Flores was far more stubborn than he'd anticipated. Her father had been successfully transferred to Mount Sinai, and the surgery was scheduled for the next day. In the meantime, he had put Eliza up in the hotel to begin her transformation. "What do you propose, then?" he finally asked. "Elegant but understated clothes, neutral colors, classic cuts, nothing ostentatious," she explained, walking over to the wardrobe and pushing past flashy garments until she found a simple black dress. "Something like this. A confident woman doesn't need to scream for attention with sequins." Damien nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Someone like you would draw too much attention dressed like a socialite. It'll be more believable if you maintain a certain authenticity." "Exactly. You're paying for my presence, not for my identity." This sentence seemed to surprise Damien, who looked at her with renewed interest. "Interesting perspective. I accept your proposal. Elegant but discreet clothing, natural makeup. But the one thing I can't compromise on is the protocol and etiquette lessons. You need to know how to behave at formal dinners, which fork to use, the appropriate conversation." "On that we agree," Eliza conceded. "I need the tools not to embarrass you, or myself." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. While Damien finalized the details of the trip and meetings with Asia Corps, Eliza immersed herself in intensive training. Her father's surgery had been a success, and with him, stable and under professional care, she could focus on her new mission. Ms. Dolores Hemmings, a severe protocol instructor who had coached diplomats and politicians, was put in charge of her social transformation. "The napkin is never used to wipe away perspiration," the woman chided during their long sessions in the hotel's private dining room. "And never, under any circumstances, do you discuss politics, religion, or money at the table." Between lessons on how to use countless pieces of silverware, greet in different languages, and maintain polite but superficial conversation, Eliza found small moments to challenge Damien on his worldview. "Do you really think any of this matters?" she asked one afternoon as they practiced a champagne toast with what was actually sparkling water. "Are these artificial rules, these hierarchies based on who has the most money? It's not about whether they matter or not," Damien replied, setting his glass down with millimeter precision. "It's simply how the world works. Money moves mountains, opens doors, saves lives, like your father's." Eliza pressed her lips together. "Money didn't save my father. People did. Doctors, nurses, people with values and a vocation. People who get paid," Damien retorted with a sardonic smile. "Do you think they only do it for the paycheck? Most of them could earn more in the private sector or abroad. They stay because of their values, because of commitment." "You're so naive," Damien sighed. "In my experience, everything has a price, even principles, as you yourself have demonstrated." The comment hit its mark. Eliza looked at him with fire in her eyes. "There's a difference between sacrificing your comfort to save a life and selling your soul for greed, but I don't expect someone like you to understand that." Meanwhile, Damien's lawyer, Ricardo Fuentes, prepared an ironclad 30-page contract detailing every aspect of the agreement. Perpetual confidentiality, compensation in case of leaks, penalties for breach of contract. Ricardo listed as Eliza signed document after document. Any violation would result in the full return of the payment plus damages. And what protects me? She asked, pausing her pen. Damien, surprised by the question, exchanged a look with his lawyer. The other half of the payment at the end of the trip, he answered, as if it were obvious. I need guarantees that our agreement regarding physical contact won't be violated, Eliza insisted, and that my reputation will remain intact. After 3 hours of negotiations, clauses were added that protected both parties equally. Between practice sessions and wardrobe fittings, Damien and Eliza spent long hours creating a believable story for their supposed romance. We met 8 months ago at a Central Park Conservancy reforestation event, Damien elaborated. I was impressed by your knowledge of native flora. And we kept our relationship private to protect me from the media frenzy, Eliza continued. We got married 3 months ago in an intimate ceremony in the Hudson Valley, with just close family. My grandfather was hospitalized, which is why there was no public announcement, Damien added, surprising himself with how smoothly they constructed their fake life together. On the eve of their departure, after a final session with the image consultant, Damien arrived at the suite with a small blue velvet box. The last thing we need to complete the illusion, he said, opening it to reveal an engagement ring with an almond-sized diamond and a platinum wedding band. Eliza caught her breath. This must have cost... The price is irrelevant, Damien interrupted. What matters is that it's convincing. With slightly trembling hands, Eliza allowed Damien to slide the rings onto her finger. They both looked at their joined hands for a second longer than necessary. They're beautiful, she admitted, but they weigh like chains. It's only for 10 days, Damien reminded her, pulling his hand away. 10 days, and we both get what we want. That night, alone in her hotel room, Eliza watched the rings glitter in the moonlight streaming through the window. She had never felt so far from herself, and yet so resolute. Tomorrow, her journey as Mrs. Sterling would begin. A fantasy of crystal and platinum that would vanish as soon as it served its purpose. What she didn't know was that the fantasy would end up transforming her reality in ways no contract could ever foresee or prevent. Narita International Airport was buzzing with activity when Damien and Eliza deplaned from the private jet. After a 14-hour flight, she was trying to hide both her awe and her exhaustion as she walked beside her husband through the VIP terminal. Smile, Damien murmured, placing a discreet hand on the small of her back. From now on, we're on stage. Eliza managed a smile she hoped looked natural. She had never left the country, and now she was on the other side of the world, playing the most important role of her life. A delegation of 3 Japanese men in immaculate dark suits awaited them with perfectly synchronized bows. "Welcome to Japan, Mr. Sterling," said the man who appeared to be the leader. "I am Kenji Watanabe, Mr. Tanaka's personal assistant. It is an honor to receive you and your wife." Damien responded with a measured bow, just as they had practiced. Eliza mimicked him, mentally thanking the endless hours of protocol with Ms. Hemmings. The drive to the Aman Tokyo Hotel took place in a black limousine that glided silently through the city's pristine streets. Eliza watched, fascinated, at the skyscrapers, the ancient temples that appeared surprisingly between ultra-modern buildings, and the almost choreographed precision of the pedestrians. "I've never seen anything like it," she whispered, unable to contain herself. Damien looked at her with a hint of indulgence. "Tokyo is one of a kind. Just wait until you see the hotel." The Aman Tokyo occupied the top floors of a skyscraper in the financial district. When they entered their suite on the 33rd floor, Eliza gasped. The minimalist space, with enormous windows framing the city and Mount Fuji in the distance, seemed to be floating among the clouds. The decor blended contemporary and traditional elements: tatami mats, washi paper sliding doors, and a hinoki soaking tub that looked as though it were carved from a single piece of wood. "This is..." Eliza began, but words failed her. "You have 1 hour to rest and change," Damien instructed, checking his watch. "Dinner with Tanaka is at 8. The restaurant, Causeway, on the 40th floor of the Park Hyatt, offered a spectacular view of an illuminated Tokyo. Mr. Hiroshi Tanaka, a man in his 60s with an imposing presence despite his medium height, awaited them in a private room with a tatami floor and a low table. "Sterling-san, welcome," he greeted with a bow. "And this must be your wife." Eliza, dressed in the simple yet elegant black dress she had chosen herself, bowed. "It is an honor to meet you, Tanaka-san," she replied in the basic Japanese she had memorized on the flight. A flicker of surprise crossed the Japanese executive's face, and he smiled with approval. The traditional kaiseki dinner consisted of 12 small courses served in sequence. Eliza discreetly watched Damien, trying to imitate his movements. However, when a dish of pufferfish sashimi was served, she froze for a moment. "It is fugu," Tanaka explained. "A dangerous delicacy if not prepared correctly. Does it worry you, Mrs. Sterling?" Damien quickly interjected. "My wife isn't accustomed to Japanese cuisine, but I'm sure she—" "I'd rather be honest," Eliza interrupted, surprising both men. "It's my first time in Japan, Tanaka-san, and I'm a little overwhelmed by so many new things, but I want to learn and experience your culture with respect." Tanaka observed her with renewed interest. Then, to Damien's surprise, he let out a warm laugh. Refreshing honesty. The wives of businessmen often pretend to know everything, even when it is clear they do not. The dinner continued with Tanaka, personally explaining to Eliza the meaning of each dish, the correct way to hold chopsticks, and little anecdotes about Japanese culture. Damien watched in amazement, as his fake wife, far from ruining the evening with her inexperience, seemed to have won over the stern businessman. At the end of the evening, as they drank green tea, Tanaka turned to Damien. "Your wife is like a cherry blossom, Sterling-san, beautiful in her simplicity and authentic in her fragility. I'm glad to see you value substance over appearance." Damien, caught off guard, looked at Eliza with new eyes. "It's what made me fall in love with her," he replied, and for an instant his voice sounded sincere. Back in the suite, the tension was palpable. The silence stretched as Eliza slipped off her heels with a sigh of relief. "I think that went well," she finally said. "It went better than well," Damien admitted, loosening his tie. "Tanaka was impressed. Your authenticity worked in our favor." "Was that a compliment?" she asked with a half-smile. "A strategic observation," he corrected. Eliza disappeared into the bathroom, returning 20 minutes later with a clean face and wearing a simple cotton pajama set. Damien had already made a makeshift bed on the sofa by the window. "I can take the sofa," she offered. "The deal was we'd keep our distance," he replied. "The bed is yours." An awkward silence fell between them. The jet lag and the intensity of the day had lowered their usual defenses. Perhaps that was why, when Eliza spoke, her voice was softer than usual. "Why is this deal so important to you? You're already immensely wealthy." Damien, who was gazing at the lights of Tokyo, took a moment to answer. "It's not just about money. It's about legacy." "Legacy? My grandfather built the empire from scratch. My father expanded it, and I have to take it to the next level. It's what's expected of me." "What's expected? Or what you want?" Damien turned to look at her. "Sometimes there's no difference." "There's always a difference," she insisted. Something in her tone made Damien open up. "I lost my parents when I was 16. A car accident on the Taconic Parkway. My grandfather raised me after that, molded me in his image. Success is the only measure of a man's worth, he used to say." Eliza absorbed this, seeing the man behind the arrogant facade for the first time. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "And you?" he asked, visibly uncomfortable with the vulnerability. "Why did you drop out of college? Julian told me you were studying botany." Eliza was surprised he had looked into that detail. "My mother died when I was 16 and Lily was just 6. Dad gave everything for us, working double shifts at the garage. When I was a sophomore in college, the economy tanked and the garage almost went under. There was no choice. Either I paid for tuition or I helped my family. You could have applied for a scholarship, a loan. Families aren't corporations, Damien. It's not about financial strategies. It's about being there when they need you." They both fell silent, contemplating the abysmal differences in their lives and values. "We should get some sleep," Damien finally suggested. "We have the first official meeting with Tanaka's team tomorrow." Eliza nodded and slipped into the enormous bed, feeling small in the silk sheets. From the other side of the room, Damien's breathing eventually evened out, signaling he had fallen asleep. Staring at the ceiling, Eliza reflected on how strange life was. A week ago, she was an anonymous gardener in Queens. Now she was in a luxury suite in Tokyo, pretending to be the wife of one of the most powerful men in the country. And the strangest part of all was that at times, the charade didn't feel entirely like a lie. Dawn cast a golden glow on the iconic Sydney Opera House as Damien and Eliza boarded the private yacht that would take them across the harbour. The meeting with Asia Corps' Australian executives had been scheduled as an informal breakfast while cruising the turquoise waters of Port Jackson. "Are you okay?" Eliza asked, noticing that Damien, always unflappable, seemed tense as the boat pulled away from the dock. "Of course," he answered curtly, discreetly gripping the railing. The yacht bounced slightly as it crossed a ferry's wake, and the color drained from Damien's face. It was then that Eliza understood. "You don't like boats," she whispered, moving closer to him. "It's ridiculous," he muttered, his jaw tight. "I use the damned yacht in Miami 3 times a year." "But you're never comfortable," she finished for him. Without another word, Eliza intertwined her fingers with his. "Look at me, not the water. We're in this together, remember?" Their eyes met, and for a moment the role of the supportive wife didn't feel like an act. In the distance, the Australian executives watched the couple's apparent intimacy with approval. Tire Dubai. The desert heat was overwhelming even inside the air-conditioned palace of Sheikh Abdullah Al Maktoum, one of Asia Corps' key investors in the Middle East. Damien and Eliza were received with a display of opulence that made the luxuries she had been getting used to seem modest. During the lavish lunch, served on gold plates by silent servants, the sheikh turned his attention to Eliza. "Tell me, Mrs. Sterling, do you not find your married life restrictive? A woman with your eyes has an independent spirit. In my experience, such spirits rarely conform to the confines of traditional marriage." Eliza felt Damien tense up beside her. The comment, seemingly innocent, carried a cultural weight that could jeopardize the entire deal. "With all due respect, Sheikh Abdullah," Damien intervened before she could answer, "my wife has not sacrificed her independence by marrying me. Her strength and autonomy are precisely the qualities I admire most in her." The conviction in his voice surprised Eliza, and perhaps even Damien himself. "In fact," he continued, his voice resonating with newfound sincerity as he took her hand across the vast, polished table, "I firmly believe that the strongest alliances, both in business and in life, are those where both parties maintain their own identity while building something greater together." The sheikh's weathered face broke into a broad, pleased smile. He raised his small glass of mint tea. "A refreshingly progressive perspective, Mr. Sterling. Let us toast, then, to alliances that strengthen us without diminishing us." Later, alone in the cavernous gold-leafed suite of their hotel, where the silence felt as opulent as the silk curtains, Eliza looked at Damien with an unguarded curiosity. The lights of the Dubai skyline glittered behind him, creating a halo around his silhouette. "That speech you gave, was that part of the act?" Damien loosened his tie, his movements stiff as he avoided her searching gaze. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, placing a hand on the cool glass. "It was the strategically correct thing to say in that situation." "It sounded real," she pressed gently, refusing to let him retreat behind his corporate facade. "I'm a good actor," he replied, his voice a low murmur. But there was a hollowness in his tone, a flicker of doubt that suggested even he was no longer entirely convinced by his own words. Paris. The Parisian rain fell in relentless, silvery sheets against the windows of their suite at the Hotel Plaza Athénée, blurring the iconic view of the Eiffel Tower into a soft, impressionistic watercolor. Eliza, cocooned in a mountain of duvets and blankets, shivered, caught in the miserable dance of fever, alternating between bone-deep chills and waves of sweat. "You should go to the dinner," she managed to say, her voice a hoarse whisper. "The European investors are crucial for the expansion." Damien, who had been pacing in the corner of the room, speaking in hushed, urgent French into his phone, raised a hand to silence her gently. "Yes, Monsieur Dubois, I'm afraid I must cancel our meeting tonight. My wife has taken ill and I cannot possibly leave her alone. Of course, first thing tomorrow, without fail." Hanging up, he turned to face her. Eliza stared at him in disbelief, pushing herself up on her elbows. "Did you just cancel on Jean-Luc Dubois? Julian said getting a meeting with him was like getting an audience with the Pope." "There will be other meetings," Damien replied with a dismissive shrug that didn't quite match the concern in his eyes. "I'll try to reschedule for the morning." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his usual confident gait softened by a quiet worry. He sat on the edge of the bed and placed the back of his hand against her forehead. His touch was surprisingly gentle. "You're still burning up." The hotel doctor said it's a common flu, but with the jet lag and the constant climate changes, your system is run down. "I'll be fine," she insisted, her words punctuated by a dry cough. "You don't have to do this." but Damien was already disappearing into the suite's kitchenette. He returned a few minutes later, carefully carrying a steaming mug that filled the room with the fragrant aroma of herbs and citrus. "What is this?" she asked, struggling to sit up. "Chamomile, mint and ginger tea with a touch of honey," he explained, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He helped her hold the warm porcelain cup, his fingers brushing against hers. "My mother used to make it for me when I was sick. It was the only thing she knew how to make in a kitchen, but it worked like magic." Eliza sipped the tea slowly, the warmth spreading through her chest. She was deeply moved by this unexpected, intimate glimpse into the boy Damien Sterling once was, long before the armor of wealth and power had been forged around him. She saw, for a fleeting moment, a child being cared for by his mother, a simple act of love in a life that had likely been anything but simple. Later that night, as the fever finally began to break, Eliza drifted in and out of a fitful sleep. During one moment of hazy consciousness, she opened her eyes to see Damien asleep in the armchair he had pulled up next to her bed. His head was slumped against the back of the chair, his usually immaculate hair slightly disheveled, and his hand was loosely holding hers, a silent, unconscious vigil in the Parisian gloom. In the soft penumbra of the lamplight, with the rain still whispering against the glass, the carefully constructed barriers between their performance and reality seemed to dissolve completely, blurring into something tender, fragile, and dangerously real. And between cities, with each passing day, with every flight that carried them across another time zone, a silent language blossomed between them. It was built not on words, but on small, telling gestures, on shared glances across crowded boardrooms that conveyed more than a 10-minute conversation ever could, on inside jokes, whispered on private jets, understood only by the two of them. In the high-stakes theater of their negotiations, Eliza became adept at reading the subtle cues in Damien's posture, the slight tensing of his jaw, the flicker in his eyes. She learned to sense precisely when he needed her to offer a supportive comment and when her greatest contribution was a quiet, reassuring presence. He, in turn, began to rely on her startlingly accurate observations about the people they were dealing with. Her insights were not based on financial reports or market analysis, but on the nuances of human behavior he had long ago dismissed as irrelevant. "How did you know the vice president of AsiaCorp in Sydney was lying about the quarterly projections?" he asked one night, as their plane carved a path through the darkness over the vast, empty expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, heading for New York. "His body language," Eliza explained, tucking her feet beneath her on the plush leather seat. "When someone is being truthful, their eye contact is natural. It ebbs and flows. He was forcing it, holding your gaze just a fraction of a second too long. It's a classic overcompensation. He was trying to sell you the lie with his eyes." Damien looked at her, his expression one of genuine admiration. "You're incredibly good at reading people. It's a skill you develop when you have to rely on human connection instead of corporate power," she replied with a small knowing smile. Over the course of their journey, Damien had watched, fascinated, as Eliza effortlessly connected with everyone she met. It didn't matter if they were the housekeeping staff at the hotel in Tokyo or the most powerful executives in AsiaCorp's global network. She spoke with the same genuine interest and respect to a bellhop in Paris as she did to the sheikh in Dubai. This ability, which he had initially written off as simple naivety, now struck him as a profound form of intelligence, a social and emotional acuity that his world had never taught him to value, let alone possess. For her part, Eliza was discovering layers to Damien that utterly contradicted the public image of the ruthless corporate shark. There was his sharp, analytical mind, of course, which was as formidable as his reputation suggested, but she also found flashes of a subtle, dry wit that would appear when he was least expecting it. She noted his prodigious memory, his ability to recall the smallest personal details about every executive they met, the name of a spouse, a child's graduation, a favorite type of wine, and use them to build rapport. And, most surprisingly of all, she witnessed small, almost imperceptible acts of generosity that he actively tried to conceal. There was that afternoon in Paris, after she had recovered from her flu. They had taken a short walk through the winding streets of Montmartre, a brief respite from their demanding schedule. She saw him pause, his gaze lingering on a small, slightly run-down building with a simple sign, a shelter for homeless children. Later that day, she saw him discreetly hand an envelope to the hotel manager. Her curiosity piqued. Eliza used the easy rapport she had built with the concierge to inquire about it. The concierge, charmed by her, confided that Mr. Sterling had just made a very substantial anonymous donation to that exact children's shelter. She confronted him about it that evening as they were packing. "Why didn't you want me to know about the donation?" Damien, caught off guard, seemed genuinely uncomfortable. "It was nothing. Besides," he added, turning away to fold a shirt with unnecessary precision, "good deeds that are publicized lose their value. They become transactions. That seems to contradict your philosophy that everything has a price," she observed quietly. He paused, his back still to her. "Maybe," he conceded, his voice low as he looked out the airplane window at the endless ocean below. "Maybe there are exceptions." As the lights of the eastern seaboard began to appear on the horizon, signaling their approach to New York, the final destination of their whirlwind tour, both Damien and Eliza felt an imperceptible but profound shift between them. What had begun as a cold clinical business transaction had morphed into something neither of them dared to name, something as authentic as it was unexpected, as fragile as it was powerful, a quiet awakening of the heart that, nonetheless, came with a firm and fast-approaching expiration date. The Grand Palais in Paris glowed under the golden floodlights that highlighted its magnificent Belle Epoque architecture. The reception, hosted by the Franco-Asian Chamber of Commerce, was a glittering confluence of the business elite from 2 continents. It was the penultimate stop on their journey, the last major performance before the finale in New York. "You look beautiful," Damien murmured as they entered the main hall, his voice a low vibration near her ear. The midnight blue dress Eliza had chosen, elegant but not ostentatious, highlighted her natural beauty in a way he now found himself appreciating with a startling sincerity. "And you don't look so bad yourself, for a corporate shark," she quipped, her fingers lightly adjusting his tie in a gesture that, after nearly 8 days of constant proximity, felt entirely natural. The evening unfolded according to plan. The informal negotiations with Asiacorp's European directors were progressing smoothly. Eliza moved through the powerful circles with a newfound grace, holding her own, maintaining her authenticity while flawlessly navigating the complex currents of social protocol. It was during a lull in the conversation, while Damien was engaged with a group of Japanese investors, that Eliza felt a familiar, unwelcome gaze upon her, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. When she turned toward the source of that uncomfortable feeling, the color drained from her face. There he was, Alex Ryder. His professional camera was slung around his neck, a press pass from Global Business magazine hanging from a lanyard, the man who had been her partner for 2 years in college, the man she thought she would build a life with before everything had fallen apart. "I need some air." She excused herself from the circle of executives' wives she had been chatting with, making her way toward a set of glass doors leading to a side balcony. She had barely taken 2 deep breaths of the cool, damp Parisian air when the balcony door opened behind her. "Eliza Flores," Alex said, his tone a slick blend of surprise and sarcasm. "Or should I say, Mrs. Sterling? What a dramatic transformation." "Alex," she replied, her voice steady as she willed her composure to hold, "I didn't know you were working for the international press. And I didn't know you'd married one of the richest men in America," he retorted, stepping closer, his eyes raking over her expensive dress. "Especially considering I saw you working as a gardener in Queens less than a month ago." A chill snaked down her spine. "People's lives change, Alex." "Not this fast," he insisted, his gaze sharp and scrutinizing. "I know you, Eliza. We lived together for 2 years. This whole setup, it's not real." "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to step past him and return to the safety of the crowded ballroom. Alex gently but firmly caught her arm. "What's really going on? Is this some kind of arrangement? Is he paying you? Because the Eliza I knew would never sell out to a guy like Sterling, no matter how many zeros he has in his bank account." "Let go of me," she demanded, her voice low and urgent, acutely aware that they could be seen. "I can look into this, you know," he threatened softly. "I have contacts, resources. A sudden marriage, no prior announcement, no leaked wedding photos. It smells like a scandal, and scandals sell magazines. Is everything all right, my love?" Damien's voice was as cold and sharp as splintered ice. He appeared in the doorway of the balcony, his expression a mask of controlled fury that Eliza had never seen before. It was a potent mix of territorial possession and what looked, shockingly, like genuine concern. "Perfect, darling," she replied, pulling her arm free from Alex's grasp. "I was just catching up with an old acquaintance. Alex Ryder, photographer. Alex, this is my husband, Damien Sterling." The two men exchanged a handshake fraught with unspoken tension. Damien subtly positioned himself between Eliza and Alex, a protective gesture that seemed more instinctual than calculated. "Ryder?" Damien said, the name sounding like a verdict. "How do you know my wife?" "We were close. In college," Alex answered, his eyes never leaving Eliza. "We had big plans together until circumstances changed." "People make choices," Eliza interjected, her voice finding its strength. "Some people stick around when things get tough. Others disappear." Damien seemed to catch the deep emotional current in her words. With a naturalness that felt unpracticed, he wrapped an arm around Eliza's waist, pulling her close. "We should be getting back. The representative from Brussels specifically wanted to talk to you about that urban reforestation project you mentioned." Without giving Alex a chance to reply, Damien guided her back into the ballroom, but not before she heard Alex whisper, "This isn't over, Eliza. We'll talk soon." Back in the hushed sanctuary of their suite at the Plaza Athénée, the silence between them was heavy with unasked questions. Damien finally broke it as he poured a whiskey from the minibar. "Who is he, really?" Eliza sighed, sinking into the plush velvet of the sofa. "My ex-boyfriend. We were together in college. He was studying journalism while I was in the botany program." "What happened?" "Real life happened," she answered, a bitter edge to her voice. "When my dad got sick the first time, and I had to drop out of school to take care of him and help Lily, Alex couldn't handle it. He said I was throwing my future away, that it was an unnecessary sacrifice. When I explained that I didn't have a choice, that my family needed me, he gave me an ultimatum. It was our life together or my family." "And you chose your family," Damien finished for her, his voice quiet. "Without a second's hesitation," she confirmed. Alex couldn't understand that real love doesn't come with conditions. He was gone the next day until tonight. Damien nodded slowly, processing the information as he took a sip of his drink. "He's a threat to our agreement. If he starts digging and finds out the truth—" "I know," Eliza whispered. "What are we going to do?" Damien pulled out his phone. "I'll call Ricardo. We need to find out everything about him. Debts, secrets, weaknesses. Something we can use to guarantee his silence." "Blackmail?" Eliza exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "Seriously, Damien, that's your solution to everything?" "It's pragmatism," he shot back. "He's threatening everything we've worked for. This merger is days away from closing." "Lies just create more lies," Eliza argued, stepping towards him, her eyes flashing. "We can't build our protection by destroying someone else. That would make us just like him. So what do you suggest? We just let him ruin everything?" Eliza took the phone from Damien's hand and placed it firmly on the table. "We talk to him. Directly, honestly. Explain the situation. Confess our entire charade? Are you insane?" "Not the whole truth," she clarified, "but enough for him to understand what's at stake. Alex is manipulative, but he's not evil. And if that fails, then what?" "Then we face the consequences," she replied with stark simplicity. "Together." Damien stared at her as if she were a creature from another planet. The cold, hard business logic that had governed his entire life dictated that you corner, pressure, and eliminate any threat. Eliza's approach, founded on principles of honesty and integrity, contradicted every survival instinct he had ever learned. And yet, "All right," he conceded finally, surprising even himself. "We'll do it your way, but I'm coming with you." The next day, in a discreet cafe in the Marais district, far from the tourist-filled boulevards, Damien watched in stunned silence as Eliza masterfully handled the conversation with Alex. Without revealing the exact nature of their financial agreement, she explained that her relationship with Damien was new but genuine, and that her father's health crisis had accelerated everything. "I'm not asking you to understand it," she concluded, her voice calm and firm. "I'm just asking you to respect my life now, just as I've respected yours by staying out of it." To Damien's astonishment, the strategy worked. The journalist, though still skeptical, seemed to retain just enough residual respect for Eliza not to want to actively destroy her. Or perhaps it was Damien's follow-up offer. an exclusive in-depth interview for his magazine after the merger was publicly announced, that ultimately sealed the deal. That night, as they packed their bags for the flight to New York, Damien looked at Eliza with a newfound respect that bordered on awe. "You were right," he admitted. "Your way worked better than mine would have. Maybe there's more than one way to solve a problem." "The world isn't as transactional as you think, Damien," she replied with a soft smile. "Sometimes honesty is the best strategy of all." What neither of them mentioned, what hung unspoken in the air between them, was how during the entire confrontation with Alex, they had acted less like business partners and more like a real couple, defending each other with a conviction that no longer felt like a performance. Manhattan unfolded below them like a glittering tapestry of light and shadow, viewed from their suite at the Mark Hotel. New York, the city that never sleeps, vibrated with its relentless energy 60 floors below. "The final stop," Damien commented, loosening his tie as he gazed out the window at the sun setting over Central Park. "Tomorrow is the final meeting with the Asia Corps board, and then it'll all be over." Eliza, who was arranging some fresh flowers she'd requested for the room, froze at his words. "It'll all be over." The simple phrase landed with a surprising weight, creating a tight knot in her stomach. "Your father sent a text," Damien said, glancing at his phone. "His recovery is going better than expected. The doctors are very impressed." "Thank you for letting me know," she replied, her smile genuine. "And thank you for everything you did for him." A comfortable silence settled between them, a stark contrast to the tense, awkward quiet of their first days in Tokyo. 9 days. Only 9 days had passed since they had embarked on this journey, yet it felt like a lifetime. "I've made a dinner reservation," Damien announced, checking his watch. "Someplace special for our last night of this experiment." The private rooftop restaurant had only one table, surrounded by flickering torches and delicate fairy lights that created a magical, intimate atmosphere beneath the vast New York night sky. The panoramic view of Manhattan stretched out in every direction, with Central Park a great dark rectangle of peace amidst the city's electric glow. "Did you rent out the entire restaurant?" Eliza asked, her voice filled with wonder as a sommelier poured them champagne. "Technically, it's not a restaurant," Damien explained with a small smile. "It's the private terrace of the hotel's owner. He happens to owe me a few favors." Eliza shook her head, still amazed by the frictionless world the ultra-wealthy inhabited. "I assume this is all part of the show for Tanaka's investigators, who are probably watching us through binoculars from a nearby building." "There's no show tonight," Damien replied, his voice low and serious, surprising her. "No cameras, no watchful eyes, just us." The dinner unfolded with an unexpected warmth. They spoke not as business partners, but as two people who had shared a series of extraordinary experiences in a compressed amount of time. The neon glow of Tokyo, the sparkling waters of Sydney Harbour, the vast deserts of Dubai, the rain-slicked cafes of Paris. "You know what's strangest about all this?" Eliza commented, savouring her dessert. "It's how my perspective has changed in just a few days. About the world, about business, about you." Damien looked up from his wineglass, his gaze intense and genuinely interested. "About me? I saw a different man than the arrogant tycoon who cornered me in the atrium," she confessed, holding his gaze across the flickering candlelight. "I saw someone who has the capacity to be so much better than he gives himself credit for. Someone who cares, even though he pretends he doesn't, who values loyalty and keeps his word, who can be generous without needing recognition." The billionaire looked away, visibly uncomfortable with her direct personal assessment. After a long moment, he responded with an honesty that startled them both. "And I've never felt so at ease with anyone. Not with my partners, not with my family," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "You're the first person in years who actually looks at me, not at my bank account or my last name. It's terrifying and liberating all at once." Eliza reached her hand across the table and placed it on top of his. It was a simple gesture, one they had repeated dozens of times as part of their charade, but now, with no audience, it felt charged with an entirely new meaning. The intimate moment was shattered by the insistent ringing of Damien's phone. "It's Watanabe, Tanaka's assistant," he said, frowning at the screen. "That's odd. It's almost 11. The brief conversation that followed transformed his expression from confusion to deep concern. "Tanaka wants to see me. Right now. He says it's urgent." "Do you want me to come with you?" Eliza offered immediately. "No," Damien replied, already standing up. "He specifically asked to speak with me alone. Wait for me here. I'll be back as soon as I can." The Mandarin Oriental, where Hiroshi Tanaka was staying, was only a 15-minute drive away. During the ride, Damien mentally replayed every detail of their negotiations, searching for any possible last-minute snag. Watanabe met him in the lobby and escorted him to the presidential suite. Tanaka, dressed in a traditional yukata, was waiting for him by the window, contemplating the same urban landscape Damien had been sharing with Eliza just hours before. "Sterling-san?" The Japanese businessman greeted him with a slight bow. "Thank you for coming at this late hour." "For you, Tanaka-san, any time is appropriate," Damien replied, studying the man's impassive face. After pouring them both glasses of sake, Tanaka got straight to the point. "Tomorrow we will sign the merger agreement that will change the destinies of our companies, but before we do, there is something I must confess to you." Damien felt the world tilt on its axis when Tanaka spoke his next words, his voice calm and even. "I have always known that your marriage was a fabrication." The American tycoon kept his expression a perfect, unreadable mask, though his mind was racing. "My investigators discovered the truth before our first meeting in Tokyo," Tanaka continued. "They learned that Ms. Flores was a gardener in your building, with no prior connection to you until days before your trip. They learned of her father's hospitalization, and that you paid for his surgery. Tanaka-san, I can explain." The older man raised a hand, silencing him. "I do not require an explanation. I require you to understand something fundamental. The true test was never about your marital status." Damien stared at him, completely bewildered. "The test," Tanaka explained patiently, "was about your capacity for commitment, for sacrifice, and for adaptation. These are the essential qualities for any lasting alliance. I watched you form an effective, respectful team with a complete stranger. I watched her influence you for the better, and I watched you respond to that influence. I watched you both grow together." "So, this was all just an evaluation?" Damien asked, stunned. "Business deals are like marriages," Tanaka said, a hint of philosophy in his tone as he refilled their glasses. "They require true commitment, not just the appearance of it. They require the ability to value qualities beyond the obvious. You, Sterling-san, have demonstrated that ability." Tanaka rose and walked to a briefcase on the table. From it he retrieved a contract. "The agreement is ready to be signed tonight, if you so wish." Damien took the documents, his hands almost trembling. Everything he had worked for, the goal that had justified this entire elaborate deception, was finally within his grasp. "However," Tanaka added, "I have taken the liberty of adding one final clause. The merger will now include a fully funded and autonomous environmental sustainability division." "Sustainability?" Damien repeated, surprised. "Your conversations with Ms. Flores about the preservation of urban green spaces and reforestation in America impressed me greatly," Tanaka explained. "She possesses a vision that could be of great benefit to our new conglomerate in the long term." Damien remembered Eliza's passionate, detailed explanations during their dinner in Paris, when Tanaka had asked them about environmental initiatives in North America. What he had dismissed as casual dinner conversation had apparently been a crucial part of his evaluation. "That's an excellent idea," he replied, his voice filled with sincere respect. "One final question, Sterling-san," Tanaka said, his gaze becoming intensely focused. "After these past 10 days, what is more valuable to you, the contract you now hold in your hands or the relationship you have built with Ms. Flores?" The question hit Damien like a physical blow. 10 days ago, the answer would have been immediate and obvious. Now, for the first time in his adult life, he hesitated on a business decision. "I do not need your answer now," Tanaka continued, a faint smile playing on his lips. "But you need to answer it honestly for yourself before you sign. Contracts can be broken, Sterling-san. True connections are much harder to find and to replace." Damien left the Mandarin Oriental with the contract in his briefcase and a tempest in his mind. As the car sped through the illuminated streets of Manhattan, he stared unseeingly at the cityscape, forced to confront a truth he had been trying to deny for days. Somewhere between Tokyo and New York, the act had ceased to be an act. And now, hours before the curtain was meant to fall, he wondered if he was prepared to return to his old life. A life that, all of a sudden, felt profoundly empty. Eliza was still on the terrace when Damien returned. The city buzzed 60 floors below, but up in their small urban oasis, Time seemed to have stopped. She knew instantly that something had changed. She saw it in his eyes, in the tense line of his shoulders, in the way he hesitated for a moment in the doorway before walking towards her. "What happened?" she asked, standing up. Damien placed the briefcase on the table and poured himself a whiskey with an unsteady hand. "Tanaka knows everything," he said finally, his voice raw. "He's known from the beginning. The fake marriage, your father, all of it." Eliza stood frozen, the information washing over her. "So, all this time we were performing for someone who already knew it was a performance?" "Apparently," Damien replied, downing his drink in one go. "His investigators had the whole story before we even landed in Tokyo. Then why put us through all this? He said the real test wasn't about my marital status. It was about intangible values, commitment, adaptability, the ability to form an effective team under pressure." He paused, looking at her directly, his eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't name. "He says we passed with flying colors. And the contract?" Damien tapped the briefcase. "It's in here, ready to be signed." A wave of contradictory emotions crashed over Eliza. Relief, confusion, and something deeper, something she refused to acknowledge. "So, we did it," she said, her smile feeling brittle. "Mission accomplished. Tomorrow we can go back to our normal lives." Normal lives. The words fell between them like stones, shattering the fragile peace. "Is that what you want?" Damien asked, taking a step closer. "To just go back as if these 10 days never happened?" "It's what we agreed to," she answered, instinctively taking a step back. "You get your billion-dollar merger, I get the money for my family. The end. You know it's not that simple anymore." "It has to be," Eliza insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "We can't confuse the fantasy we've been playing with reality." Damien took another step towards her, closing the distance between them. "Is that what you think this was, a fantasy? What else could it be?" she retorted, her voice cracking as she fought back tears. "We're from two completely different worlds, Damien. Your life is boardrooms and private jets. Mine is greenhouses and people who earn in a month what you spend on a single bottle of wine. That doesn't matter." "Of course it matters," she cried out. "Do you think that just because we shared 10 extraordinary days, all of our differences magically disappear? Our contract ends tomorrow. You'll go back to your world, and I'll go back to mine." When Damien reached for her hand, she flinched away, her eyes reminding him of the terms of their original deal. "Remember the second condition," she said softly. "You couldn't fall in love with me." "That was a ridiculous condition," he whispered. "And yet, you agreed to it." A tense silence descended, thick with unspoken words and feelings battling for release. "What are you really afraid of, Eliza?" Damien finally asked, his voice gentle. "Are you afraid that this isn't real, or that it is?" She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a vulnerability she had never shown him before. "How can I trust that this isn't just another one of your whims?" she answered, her voice breaking. "You've spent your whole life valuing nothing but money and power. To you, people are disposable, interchangeable. How many women have come and gone from your life thinking they were special, only to be replaced by the next one?" The words hit their mark. Damien physically recoiled as if she had struck him. "That's not fair," he said quietly. "No, it's realistic," she countered. 10 days ago you didn't even know I existed. And 10 days from now, who knows what new project, what new conquest will have your attention." Without waiting for a reply, Eliza turned and walked towards the door. "I need to be alone. Tomorrow is our last day. We have to keep up appearances one last time. We can talk after the signing." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Damien alone with his thoughts and a view of New York that suddenly seemed cold, vast, and utterly desolate. He didn't sleep that night. Eliza's words, intertwined with Tanaka's, spun in his mind in a relentless cyclone. What is more valuable to you, the contract or the relationship? For the first time in years, perhaps since the day his parents died, Damien Sterling was forced to confront an ugly truth about himself. He had built an empire, but in doing so he had become the very man his grandfather had trained him to be, someone who measured everything, even human connection, in terms of its strategic value. Eliza was right. People had been interchangeable in his life, and the most damning part was that he hadn't even realized it until she held a mirror up to his face. As the first light of dawn began to paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of rose and gold, Damien Sterling finally made a decision. The boardroom on the top floor of Asia Corp's Manhattan headquarters gleamed, the morning light pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows. The business elite of 2 continents were assembled: Asia Corp's primary shareholders, their lawyers, and Damien's team, including Julian, who had flown in from New York the day before. Eliza, impeccable in a restrained emerald green dress, played her part as the perfect supportive wife, her professional smile never quite reaching her eyes. There was a palpable distance between her and Damien that hadn't been there before, but in the flurry of pre-signing excitement, no one but them seemed to notice. Hiroshi Tanaka presided over the meeting with his customary formality, though Damien caught a flicker of intense curiosity in the older man's eyes as they met his across the long table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tanaka began, "today we complete a journey that began 3 months ago. The merger between Asia Corp and the Sterling Media Group represents not only an exceptional business opportunity, but the union of 2 complementary corporate philosophies." The lawyers distributed the final contracts, 50 pages of dense legalese, culminating in signature lines that would forever alter the global corporate landscape. As the executives began to review the documents, Damien stood up unexpectedly. A murmur rippled through the room. Julian shot him an alarmed look, while Tanaka simply raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Before we proceed with the signing," Damien announced, his voice clear and steady, "I would like to propose an addition to the contract." The lead counsel for Asia Corp cleared his throat. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, inserting a specific hiring clause at this stage is highly irregular. It could significantly delay the entire process and potentially jeopardize the agreement." Tanaka watched Damien intently, as if taking the final measure of the man before him. "Is this a condition of your signature, Sterling-san?" he asked at last. Damien's gaze flickered to the contracts on the table. Everything he had ever dreamed of, everything he had worked and schemed for, was a penstroke away. Then he looked at Eliza. Her eyes were wide, reflecting a maelstrom of confusion and something else he couldn't quite decipher. Hope? Fear? Both? The world seemed to hold its breath as Damien Sterling faced the most important decision of his life: to sign the deal he had always wanted, or to honor the one thing he had discovered was more valuable than any corporate merger. "Yes," he replied with a clarity that stunned everyone in the room, including himself. "It is a non-negotiable condition." A stunned silence fell over the boardroom. Disbelieving stares were fixed on Damien, while Tanaka studied his face, a slow, knowing smile beginning to form. It was Julian who finally broke the silence. "Damien, perhaps we can discuss this privately," he urged in a low voice. "Let's not compromise years of work over a last-minute impulse." "It's not an impulse, Julian," Damien said, never taking his eyes off Eliza. "It's a correction." After a moment that stretched for an eternity, Tanaka gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Draw up the addendum," he instructed his legal team. "Ms. Flores will be appointed as the head consultant for the new division, with the autonomy Mr. Sterling has requested." A flurry of activity ensued. As the lawyers hastily drafted the new clause, Damien walked over to Eliza's side. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Keeping a promise I didn't know I was making," he answered softly. "Building something real." When the addendum was ready, Damien took the golden pen offered to him. He signed his name with a firm, steady hand. The room erupted in applause. Flashes from press cameras immortalized the historic moment. The Sterling Asia Corp merger was official. Damien wore a perfectly rehearsed smile as he shook hands and accepted congratulations. Amidst the celebration, no one noticed when Eliza quietly slipped out of the room. New York City welcomed Eliza back into its chaotic embrace. The grit, the noise, the crowded subways, it all felt strangely comforting after the sterile luxury she had inhabited. Her first stop was Mount Sinai Hospital, where Gilbert Flores was already walking the halls, his recovery progressing remarkably. "My girl, you look tired," her father observed, studying the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could conceal. "Is that new job that exhausting?" Eliza forced a smile. "Just jet lag, Dad. It'll pass." She hadn't found the courage to tell him the truth about her temporary employment as the fake wife of billionaire Damien Sterling. The next day, she called her old boss at Viridian Gardens. Surprised by her return, but well aware of her talent, he reassigned her to a position at the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx. 3 days passed in a blur. Eliza moved through her days on autopilot, finding a measure of solace in the simple, familiar routines: pruning, watering, repotting. Meanwhile, the financial news was buzzing about the historic deal between Sterling Media and AsiaCorp. The gossip columns, however, were more interested in the mysterious disappearance of Mrs. Sterling during the post-signing celebrations. Probably just another fleeting romance for the Manhattan playboy, she heard a co-worker comment while flipping through a magazine in the break room. Eliza accepted her new reality with a quiet resignation. She had fulfilled her contract and received her payment. The deal was done, the charade was over. What she hadn't anticipated was the profound emptiness that had taken root in her heart, a feeling of having lost something she had never truly possessed. On the morning of the fourth day, Eliza arrived early at the orchid greenhouse, her favorite section of the botanical garden. The solitude and the rich scent of damp earth were a balm to her spirit. She was concentrating on a delicate, endangered species of native orchid when she heard footsteps approaching on the gravel path. Without looking up, she spoke automatically. "The greenhouse doesn't open to the public until 9. "I'm not here as a member of the public," a terribly familiar voice replied. "I'm here for the botanist." Eliza froze. Slowly, she straightened up and turned to find Damien Sterling standing there. He was dressed in a way she never would have imagined. Simple jeans and a plain blue button-down shirt. No tie, no ostentatious watch. But the most shocking thing was not his casual attire. It was that he wasn't alone. Standing at a respectful distance behind him were Hiroshi Tanaka and a small entourage. "What are you doing here?" Eliza managed to ask, pulling off her gardening gloves. "I signed the contract," Damien began, taking a step closer. "And then 24 hours later I cancelled it. It took me that long to realize that I can't build my future on a foundation that would destroy the only true thing I've found in my life." Eliza stared at him, bewildered, searching his face for any sign that this was just another game, another performance. "I don't understand." Tanaka stepped forward, a serene smile on his face. "Ms. Flores, your influence transformed this man in ways not even he anticipated. In 40 years of international business, I have never seen a man walk away from a deal of this magnitude for love." "You walked away from the merger?" Eliza asked, her voice a whisper of disbelief. "From that version of it, yes," Damien confirmed. "But I negotiated something different, something I believe has far more long-term value." With a nod from Damien, one of his assistants handed him a folder. He held it out to Eliza. "The Flores Sterling Foundation for Botanical Research and Preservation," he explained. "A joint venture with AsiaCorp's Environmental Division. It's endowed with enough funding to develop conservation programs for endangered American species, create urban gardens in underserved communities, and establish educational centers." Eliza flipped through the documents with trembling hands. "This foundation is yours to run, Eliza," Damien continued, his voice earnest. "You will direct it with complete autonomy. AsiaCorp provides the international financial backing, and I provide the infrastructure and contacts here in the States." "Why would you do this?" she asked, her eyes still locked on the impossible documents in her hands. Damien took a deep breath, like a man about to leap from a great height. "Because I don't want an empire if I can't share it with you," he declared, his voice raw with a sincerity she had never heard from him before. "Not as a stand-in wife in a corporate sham, but as my true partner, in business and in life." Eliza held her breath as Damien closed the final distance between them. "I know I broke our contract," he went on, his eyes pleading with hers. "The part where I promised not to fall in love with you, I broke it completely, because I am absolutely, irrevocably in love with you, Eliza Flores." And then, in the quiet, fragrant air of the orchid greenhouse, before the watchful eyes of their small audience, Damien broke the first condition of their contract as well. He gently cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the very first time. There were no commercial agreements, no pretenses, no cameras or expectant crowds. There was only the pure, unvarnished truth of a feeling that had blossomed against all odds, between two worlds that had seemed irreconcilable. When they finally broke apart, tears were streaming freely down Eliza's cheeks. "Our original contract is terminated," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "This new agreement, I accept with my whole heart." 6 months later, the main conservatory of the New York Botanical Garden had been transformed into a floral paradise. Amidst native orchids, bromeliads, and ferns, a small group of people gathered to witness the official union of Damien Sterling and Eliza Flores. Gilbert Flores, fully recovered and beaming with pride, walked his daughter down an impromptu aisle of scattered rose petals. Lily, now an enthusiastic botany student on a full scholarship from the new foundation, waited as the maid of honor beside a simple bamboo arch. Among the guests, Hiroshi Tanaka watched with a look of deep satisfaction, seated next to Julian, who was still trying to fully comprehend the radical transformation his boss had undergone in a few short months. A real marriage at last, Tanaka murmured with an enigmatic smile. In its first few months of operation, the Flores Sterling Foundation was already revolutionizing the approach to corporate environmental conservation in the United States. Eliza's botanical expertise, combined with Damien's business acumen, had created a powerful synergy that was attracting international attention. But beyond their professional achievements, something even more precious had flourished. The tycoon who had once measured his worth in stock prices and market share had discovered an incomparable wealth in the profound simplicity of authentic love. And the gardener, who was deeply distrustful of the corporate world, had learned that even in the most seemingly hostile soil, something beautiful and true can take root and grow. As they exchanged their vows under the canopy of a century-old oak tree, Eliza and Damien understood the truth that had brought them together. Like the most resilient plants in nature, true love can find a way to blossom in the most unlikely of circumstances, forever transforming the landscape of the lives it touches.